What God has done with my pain.
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 Welcome to What God Has Done with My Pain. I have a really, really great guest today, Jaimie. Jaimie has actually already recorded with me, but unfortunately we had some technical difficulties, so we're having to do it again, just because I really, really think that Jaimie's testimony is so powerful, and I don't want her testimony to be lost, and I don't want it to not be heard. So I'm so grateful because she took time out of her day again to sit down with me and talk. So I'm just so grateful. Thank you so much, Jaimie, for coming on. And but yeah, if you want to go ahead and just introduce yourself a little bit or reintroduce yourself.
Yes, thank you for having me again. It's truly a blessing just to be asked to share my story. But my name is Jaimie, and I live in Louisiana. I have two beautiful children, one 7-year-old son and one 18-month-old daughter, and I'm married. Yeah, we are just trying to live our best life all together.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. Um, yeah, and again, like so incredibly grateful that you took time to jump back in and share everything. And so yeah, let's jump in. I know when we talked on the phone, you discussed, what it was like in your childhood and in the home you grew up in. And you talked about just, there being alcohol and that. So if you want to just kind of, we can start there and we'll go from there.
Right. Yeah, so I grew up with my dad and my stepmom and my three stepsisters. And both my parents were alcoholics, and they were physically um, and mentally, emotionally abusive towards me. Um, and that caused a lot of pain as a child growing up in that environment. And
Yeah. I I think I wanted to ask, like, you unfortunately had the disadvantage of having two alcoholic parents. You didn't have an anchor somewhere to run to or to feel some form of safety. So, what was that like for you to have two, not one, but two, and then also just that environment that you were in, growing up in that environment and seeing that behavior, and then also that like abuse that you were dealing with?
I think the best way I can describe it as to how I felt growing up was just chaotic. It was pure chaos. Because of the drinking and the violence, there was a lot of fighting between not only me and my parents, but between both of my parents together. They fought each other a lot. And so there was just a lot of uh, friction, just constantly, all of the time. Felt like there was no calmness, no peace, um, just very chaotic, I think is the best way I can describe my childhood growing up.
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine that we also discussed in the past, in the first interview, that feeling of rejection, how you felt you were outcasted among your siblings, how you felt like you were also dealing with, like, you were watching the abuse, and then some of that abuse was rolling over onto you, but only you, and it started this with like an outcast rejection and this feeling of just being alone.
Yeah. I never could understand why they targeted me. Um, I guess I was the stepchild to my stepmom. I don't know if maybe that had something to do with it. Um, and um, so I never really understood why. And that was very confusing to me. I always felt like maybe if I just did better in school, or if I did better at home, if I always felt like I had to try and do better so that maybe that abuse wouldn't be projected
Mm,
onto me. So it was a constant just battle of trying to perform well so that I wouldn't endure that type of trauma.
yeah. Yeah. Wow. And I remember on the phone you discussed at an early age getting invited to church. So with that, like my next question would be, when was it that you feel like Jesus or your interest into God entered? Like when did that begin and how did it begin?
Right. So yeah, like you said, I was in like maybe fifth grade. A friend of mine from school invited me to go to church with her and her family. And it was a rare occasion for me to get to actually go with anyone to do anything. So it was a big deal to me, um, just to get to be able to go and do something. Um,
Mm,
but I remember sitting through the service and just really listening. And it was my first time ever really being introduced to that kind of environment. My parents didn't take us to church, and I'd never really experienced that much. But I remember at the end of that service, the preacher asking if anyone, needed prayer to come forward and, we could all pray together. And I just remember feeling like,
mm,
no, like I have to go. I have to go up there. Like I need to go up there. And I didn't understand why or what I was really doing.
mm,
I just remembered feeling the need to get up and go. And so I did. I went to the front and I started praying and just really for the first time asking God to come into my situation and help me because I knew that what was happening wasn't good. I knew that I couldn't do it alone, that I needed help. And so I just remember praying and asking God to come into my life and to help me. Um, and when I was done praying, I opened my eyes and there was just this community of people
mm,
around me praying with me. And it was such a beautiful thing because for the first time, it felt like um, I had a community that was for me and not against me.
wow. That is so beautiful. I can only imagine that must have been difficult to walk up, making that step to get the courage because you feel this pull and you're kind of having this internal back and forth with yourself. What was it like to leave church that evening and, leave that environment and go back to your home environment? Because you discussed about where does this fit in my home life? Like, how can I bring this home with me? So, yeah, go into some of that. What was it like to leave that evening and go back into your home environment with this newfound love?
Right. It was very confusing. I was very confused. I didn't, I struggled with, like you said, bringing that home with me. It was hard because it was two totally different
Mm,
environments. And I didn't really understand how things could be so good at church and I could experience the love of God in such a way and then go home and experience the pain and the abuse that I was experiencing at home. It was a very confusing time for me.
mm, yeah. I remember just when you told me about it the first time, how you've been so used to being rejected that now you have this place of, am I worthy of this love too? Like this newfound community. Can I come and be with them? And also getting to go to church. How long were you able to go to church for, when you did start going to church?
I was only going like once every now and then when
Mm,
my friends would invite me. Um, so it wasn't very often. It was very just every now and then
mm,
at that time
yeah,
in my life.
yeah. And were you excited to go? Like every time you got the opportunity to go, was it like, oh my goodness, yes?
Yes, I was very excited. I was always very ready to go to church. It was because it was such a different atmosphere than I was used to that it was just intoxicating in a way
Mm.
for me.
And in this time, what is, because I imagine like you're going to church, but your parents aren't. What was that like? What was that relationship like where you're having this new influence in your life and you're going to church? What was that like once they started to see that in you?
Well, I actually kept a lot of it to myself. I
Mm,
didn't really share what was going on, or what I was feeling or what I was experiencing. Um, just I think because of fear of
mm,
further rejection from them, I just kind of kept it to myself. Um, and they didn't really, my parents didn't really try to like see what was going on or what I was doing. It was just kind of like my own little safety of my own little getaway and
yeah, like your
my
safe
own little
haven.
um yeah.
And so how long, were you able to go? Like, were you able to go? Because I believe you talked about going from like the 5th grade. Do you remember how long, you went for?
Um no, I know that it wasn't very long because um my dad ended up getting very upset with my friend's mom, because we ended up getting home late one night, and then after that I wasn't really able to go back to church with her anymore. And so
Mm,
there was a really long time of me not going after
mm.
that.
What was that like for you when you had to stop going and you weren't able to go anymore? And you no longer had this escape to go to?
Um, it was it was difficult. It really made me question, like, how is it that, I can experience such goodness at church and come home and experience the abuse and the pain that I was
Mm,
experiencing there. It really made me question my faith, um, and it
yeah.
caused a lot of questioning for me in that time.
Did you grow angry with God at any point, because you talked about praying and praying and you were bringing God into your situation and you knew that it what you were going through wasn't okay. At any point were you starting to feel a little bit of resentment or anger, just like you mentioned, like just confused on what was going on?
Right. Yes, I would say I definitely experienced some resentment towards God
Mm,
because I wanted things to be better. I wanted things to be different at home, like I had experienced at church. And that just wasn't happening for me. In fact, things were starting to get worse. Um, the further time went along, the fighting and the abuse um, definitely increased the older that I got. Moving into like middle school age, things really got worse for me.
mm. Are you comfortable diving into how was it that it got worse, and how that kind of developed?
Right. Um, well, as I was becoming, a young woman and things were changing in my life as just the makeup of who I was, becoming a young
Mm,
woman. Of course, I experienced a lot of emotion and a lot of just change in that time of my life. And so adding that onto the abuse was just even more chaotic.
yeah.
Um, but I had also ended up um, losing my dad at 13.
Mm,
He passed away from a heart attack. And so that was just devastating to me.
yeah.
And shortly after my dad passed away, my stepmom told me that I needed to find a place to go or the state was going to come and pick me up and I would be put into foster care. And so that was just also very devastating. And it seemed like things were just continuously getting worse and worse.
Yeah. When you talk about losing your father, the first time we did the interview, you talked about how you didn't even know he was gone. That experience of you coming to find out how, or that he was already gone, feeling like you talked about one, not even being told, you found out, in a way that I feel like someone should be prepped before finding out. And so you had no prep, you had no guidance. Um, Go ahead and kind of dive into that experience of like when you arrived at the hospital, not knowing your father was already dead, and then kind of going through that alone and not having anyone. Because I believe you said you were around 13, 14 around that time.
Yes, I was 13.
Mm,
Um, so my dad had had a heart attack at home, and the ambulance came and picked him up and brought him to the hospital. And I was left with my aunt, and she brought me to her house, and then we ended up going to the hospital. But in the span of the time of going to her house and going to the hospital, I wasn't given any update. I wasn't told what was going on or anything. And um, we arrived at the hospital, and I walked into the room that he was in, and I could visually see that he wasn't there anymore. Nobody told me he had passed. I just kind of walked in and found out by seeing him. And
yeah.
um, I really feel like someone should have prepped me to let me know what was happening before just finding out
Yeah.
that way. It was very devastating.
Yeah. Because, of course, other than your stepmother and your step sisters, this is the only piece of family that you have. And to not be
Yeah.
so guided through it, to not have anyone say, hey, just so you know, this has happened, so you're dealing with that on your own. And um so after your father passing, now you're left with your stepmother and you're only 13 years old. So what was that like after? Because there's a shift now. I mean, I can only imagine there's a whole absence of your father, and now you are already feeling alone, rejected. You've gone through this abuse. You no longer have that safe haven that was church. So what was that like after um, losing your father?
Um, it was a tremendous change in my life. Um, and there was so much grief, and I didn't fully understand what I was feeling
Mm,
or what I was dealing with. And I didn't know how to cope with that. And I still didn't have anyone to help me through it because my stepmom continued to stay very drunk. And I kind of took on the role of watching over her to make sure she was okay through that process
mm,
of grieving and mourning. I kind of was put in a place of taking on the caregiver role because she wasn't acting
Mm,
as a mother at that time.
yeah. Wow. And that's so hard because you mentioned as well that you were, I believe, older than your stepsisters. So you were the person where you had some of this responsibility placed on you. And you because like realistically in a home where you have someone who is an alcoholic and they're not functioning properly and you are, you know, an adolescent but also older than your siblings, you naturally take on that responsibility and that weight. And so I can only imagine that you're grieving, but you're grieving alone and you're also taking on this new responsibility. How long did that go on for?
Just for the record, uh in this family unit that I was living in, I was actually the youngest.
Oh, the youngest.
Um yes. But my stepsisters had moved out, and so it was just me and my stepmom at this time.
Mm.
Um but what was your question again?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, one, I want to say, wow, the youngest, that completely shifts it for me. Cause like, I don't know if just hearing you talk about taking on that responsibility filled the gap in for you being the oldest, but for you being the youngest, um, my initial question was, how were you dealing with that grief by yourself? Because you're grieving by yourself. And then you're also taking this responsibility of just being there for her because she's not functioning the way that, a person would if they weren't already drinking so much.
Right. I actually took my grief and I wrote it down on paper. Um,
Mm,
I started to write letters to my dad and telling him,
mm,
ooh, I'm gonna cry, telling him how I felt, how much I
mm.
missed him, and just what was going on in my life. I really um, poured out my feelings onto paper. That's really how I dealt with it.
Wow. Wow. That's that's absolutely beautiful because you were able to find some form of outlet, whether, even if it was just like and I always say beautiful because these letters are coming straight from the heart. It's coming directly from inside, no filter, just completely how you're feeling. Um, did you feel like this helped a lot during your grieving process of just being able to write to him and be able to put your feelings down on paper?
Yes, it definitely was a way for me to release those emotions
Mm.
in a way that to me was healthy, and it was the only way that I knew how to express it because I didn't really have anyone to really go to at that time. So just writing for me was the best outlet.
Wow. And so from going from writing and being able to grieve and bring that, down onto paper, what happened or what went from once you've lost your father and now you're growing, life does continue to go on and we still hold on to those we love and miss. What was your life after losing your father now that you're growing and now you're going from middle school to high school and you're still uh, I guess the way to say it is you're still here. So you're still going through the motions of life um and growing and especially in such a uh, important time and such an important age where we start to find our personalities, our character, our development. What was that like?
Right. So it was again very chaotic for me. Shortly after my dad passed, like I had mentioned before, I was told that I needed to find somewhere to go. So my stepmom was basically kicking me out of the house, telling me I needed to find somewhere to go. And so I went to school, and told a friend what was happening, and her mom had invited me to come stay with them. And I stayed with them for, I think, maybe 2 or 3 years. I lived with my friend and her family. And that was really, it was kind of a breath of fresh air for me, because there was, for the first time in my life, a stable family unit.
Yeah. And
And so I
with
was able to,
that oh, I'm sorry. I was just saying that that shift from your old home to this new home, what was that like?
um, it was very scary. Um, just going from what I had always known into the unknown um, was scary. And I think that going into living with these people, I felt, and having experienced the abuse in the past, I
Mm,
really felt the need to again perform and to measure up so that I wouldn't experience more abuse. So I
yeah.
kind of shaped myself into what I thought they wanted me to be, and how
Mm,
they wanted me to act, how they wanted me to respond, so that I would fit in as in their family and not be a problem for them.
mm. And I can only imagine that during this time, without meaning to, you still feel somewhat outcasted though, because you're trying to fit into this mold that just so that you can please and perform and not experience any abuse, but also because it's a new home and these people have taken you in, but a part of you still knows that like you're not entirely at that time it's not entirely like this immersive like you not that you're not a part of the family but like something inside of you is wanting to feel worthy of it because of how you're talking about performing so that you can earn this spot. Like it sounds like you were trying to make sure you earned that spot, you know, and you were earning that place in that home. That what was that like, you know, in those 3 years you're doing all of this and you know, you're becoming, you know, or not becoming, but you are living with them and you are included in their life. Did you at some point say, oh, like I really feel like this is home, or was a part of you just still feeling like I have to make sure I don't mess this up? I have to make sure that, you know, I earn this and that the only way that I'll have it is if I keep earning it.
Right. So I think throughout my stay with them, it was a constant feeling of needing to perform, to be um, accepted, to be wanted there, and not necessarily because of anything they did or said. It was just my own personal um, experience of what was happening and what had happened to me, and it was difficult to navigate the grief of losing my dad, the grief of losing my home that I had, grew up in, and the family that I grew up with, and then trying to fit in to this new home. Um, it was very difficult. It was a difficult time.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I can only imagine what that must have been like for you. And so I imagine that this season of your life, these 3 years came to an end. What was that transitional point for you? What was that like? What was that end chapter to begin a new chapter?
So after the 3 years of me staying with my friend's family, towards the end of it, I was really starting to want to search for a church. I wanted to go get back into church and I was
Mm.
asking questions about going to church, and um, my stepsisters had gone to a Catholic church, and I was asking if I could go to the same church with them, and it really caused a big argument within the family over me going to church. And um, at that point, I had really just hit rock bottom.
Mm.
Um, the floor just kind of fell out for me, out from underneath me. And um, I hit a really low spot of depression and just feeling like I couldn't take it anymore. And so I ended up cutting myself. And I was my mom, my friend's mom, found out. And I remember saying, like, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. I just want this to be over. And she ended up placing me in the hospital to stay, for my protection and to keep me safe, because I was clearly not in a good state mentally.
Yeah. And so because I imagine when you were in that hospital, you were sitting there kind of reflecting. It's just you in that room, um, really just reflecting and thinking about everything and just life and meaning. So what was that like? You've been placed in this hospital room, and I know that like they hold you for a certain amount of time. So what was that like um in that period?
Right. So I was in there for, I think it's 72 hours is the stay that I had to stay. And within that time of being there, I almost felt like I was being punished in a way. I felt like I felt so disconnected from life itself in that
Mm.
hospital. Um, and it was very difficult. And I just remember wanting to get better and to feel better because I was just at such a low spot in my life.
Mm. Wow. And now that you've, spent this time in the hospital, what happened afterwards when you were released? Were you able to go back home with your friend? Or was there just like not knowing what security you had at that point?
Um, I was able to go back home with my friend's family, but shortly after that, I ended up moving in with my biological mom, who at the time I at one point I didn't know where my mom. I'm sorry. I was told from my dad before he passed that my
Mm.
mom had passed away.
Mm.
And while living with my friend's family, I found out that my mom was in fact alive. And
Mm.
when I got out of the hospital, I had the opportunity to go live with her. And so that's where I ended up going after the hospital.
Wow. I want to ask, do you remember what that was like to go from, I've grieved my mom, she's gone, to wait a minute, she's not, she's still here. How did you come to find out that she was still alive? How was that like? Did she reach out to you or did you reach out to her? And then what was that like when you were faced with that realization of like, my mom's alive?
Right. Well, she reached out to me. She actually called me on the phone one day. I guess she had been looking at my MySpace page, and I
Oh,
had posted my
MySpace.
number. Yes. And I guess I I had posted my number on there somewhere, and she called me, and I remember, being on the phone and her saying, like, "This is your mom, I wanna get to know you," and I was just like, "No, no, you're not my mom. I don't know who you are. My mom's dead." And so I was
Mm,
very confused. So I gave the phone to my friend's mom, and she talked to her, and come to find out she actually was my mom. And
mm,
it was shocking to me. In a way, it was so weird because on one hand, I was so happy to know that my mom is alive, but on the other hand, it was
yeah.
like, well, why would someone tell me that she was dead if she wasn't? It was very confusing.
Mm. Yeah, I can only imagine that one, you grieved, and then now you're like, wait a minute, she's here, but two, made you question your dad as well in that moment because someone you love and really, really cherish, your father told you this information. It's one thing if you hear it from, like, someone or an aunt or something like that, like maybe a second person, but someone so direct like a dad, to have that realization and then have to reflect back to that conversation that you had when you were told that she was dead must have really opened some kind of a band-aid wound where you're like, this actually still kind of stings because you're telling me my mom was alive this whole time and I could have reached out to her, or I could have known more of her. And like I said earlier, like, you're at an age where I feel like teenage girls need their moms. Dads are great, but to a certain extent. And when your dad was or you were in the environment with your dad that you were in, you definitely need a mom. You need that nourishment and that love. So, what was that like? Like, you're just like, okay, mom, you're alive, and you're talking to her, and you're kind of discovering this. Were you excited? Were you like, wow, like this is a great opportunity? What was that like?
Yes, it was such a blessing because I was finally getting to know who I came from. I was getting
Mm,
to know more about me through her because we were so much alike.
mm.
It's kind of funny. So to be able to see where I came from and just to get to know more about who I am in a way through knowing my mom was a beautiful experience.
Wow. And did you end up, well, I think you mentioned it, going to go live with her. What was that like too? Like, you're now shifting again another, so it's like, you're shifting from one environment to another environment, but now you're shifting to one that you're excited about, you're like really ready to go. What was that like? Where was she living at the time? Was it a not a big move, but like, was it in a different state?
Yes, I moved from Louisiana to South Carolina.
Mm. And so when you moved in with her and you got to see her for the first time, were you nervous? What was that like?
I was very nervous and also excited at the same time. Um, but getting to meet her was um, very very fulfilling, honestly. It's something that I had dreamed of being able to do in a time of thinking that she wasn't here. It was something that
Mm.
I thought wouldn't ever happen for me, and it was happening. So it was, um, it was a tremendous blessing for me.
Wow. And so with having that, like, now you have your mom and you're getting to spend time with her, when were you able to kind of re not reintroduce, but rediscover your relationship with God after everything that you've had happen, and losing your father, to grieving your father by yourself, to moving in with your friend and then ending up in the hospital for 72 hours and then discovering your mom's alive. Like after all of these things, that are very heavy, when were you able to rediscover your relationship with God and start going to church again after living with your mom?
So, my um my stepsister that I lived with my mom, um, and my stepdad, she started going to church right down the road from us. And one day she came home and invited um me to come with her. And
Mhm.
so I said yes, and I visited church with her that following Sunday. And I was just greeted with a group of really awesome students from school, and a lot of um, mentors that um, were very um, just a blessing to me in that time. And I started to attend church regularly again, and I really um, submerged myself into that environment again for the
Mhm.
first time since I since my since I was little.
Wow. Would you say that you discovered freedom at that time?
Yes, I would I would definitely say that I experienced freedom in that time.
Wow. And I know that in the last recording we had, you talked about the bipolar disorder and learning to cope with that and have that and be in a relationship with God. And so, what was that like for you?
Um yes, so I learned that I have bipolar disorder, and that was um kind of confusing, um because um I was learning that there was something that isn't necessarily right in my brain, like that there was actually something physically not right in my brain.
Mm,
And I remember thinking like, well, why is this happening? Why is this something that I have to deal with? It felt very unfair in the beginning. Um, but learning that I have bipolar disorder has actually brought me closer to God in a way, because I've had to lean on Him to help me through it. I've had to lean on Him for the healing that I
mm,
need, to be able to become better in areas that I struggle with. And so
mm,
I I think that um, learning about my bipolar disorder has actually, um, in a way, brought me closer to God.
mm. Amen. I really think that in it too, like we talked about a second ago about freedom, I also feel like although it must have been so confusing going through that and discovering that about yourself, there's also that bit of freedom of being like, oh, that might explain certain emotions that I was experiencing and things that I was dwelling with. And like when you're wounded to the extent that you're wounded at the age that you were wounded, like the abuse, the rejection, the hurt, the loss, there are going to be wounds that are sustained from them, and some might heal a little quicker, but others not as quick. And same as physical wounds, when we think about a gash or a broken leg, we need a physician. And I think that Jesus is the perfect person to have in our lives to say like, oh, I have this thing, and you are my physician, you are my freedom in that. And normalizing talking about something that I feel like has been taboo for so long. Cause like, physical pain is always like, oh, it's there, we can see it, we can address it. But I think that there's also so much beauty in saying like this is something that I've discovered about myself, and the awkwardness is in it, and the confused, like all the confusion that came with it, but then also seeing like how God has been there for you through that. And I just really love how you talk about it and how you describe it, because it's just a lot of the times we tend to put our pain and our struggles and our wounds in the closet and hide it away. But sometimes, or at least what I've come to discover through this podcast, is when you talk about it, one, there's so much freedom, but two, there's freedom for someone else. You kind of like extend a hand to someone, and they're like, wow, like that person not only has lived a similar life or has endured, but they also, have wounds, and they testify to God's goodness and his doctorate in those wounds and how he walks with those wounds. And so, so incredibly beautiful, because your testimony is just, if not one thing after the other, and from such a young age, and so glad that God was able to be with you during all of that, even in those moments and in those tears and in those nights where it's like, I don't feel like anyone's here. I feel so alone and so afraid. I'm so grateful that God brought your mom, back into your life. And so, what has your relationship been with, like with your mom now into your adulthood?
Um, we um, we don't really have much of a relationship, because when I was living with them, uh, things ended up turning in a way that was not very good. And
Mm,
um, she actually was arrested for cooking meth at our house. And so our relationship really struggled after that.
mm,
And so that that relationship hasn't really been on the mend yet.
yeah. And I'm glad that we hit that topic, because I'm so grateful that you had her in that time when you needed it. And I can only imagine how difficult that was when it wasn't as easy to keep that relationship. But the amount of people who have fought for a relationship with their parents and have got to the point, and then for some reason there's like a trap door under them, and it's like, I no longer have this relationship with my parent. I thought that I could have this person in my life, and things are going great, and now something's happened and something else has happened. And I had interviewed a girl, um I think 2 3 months ago, and actually her recording had some difficulty too. We just never got around to re-recording it. But she talked about the difficulty of wanting a relationship with your mother, and hers was a different situation all completely. But she talked about wanting a relationship with your mother, and either them not being recipient and you having hope, but then your hope gets up and then it falls through. And so it's in a world where we are children, and we are the children of God, and we have him. It can be so difficult to say like, but I still wish I had a physical parent that I could have, like the type of parent where,
Yeah.
back when I was a hairstylist, I had, people in my chair, and they would have cute little group chats with their parents, and they text back and forth. And um I remember thinking, for me, I was like, man, that must be really nice. That must be really nice to have
Yeah.
that type of relationship, where your dad's taking your car out to get the oil change, or he's changing it himself, and you can hang out with your mom. And like, if you have that, cherish it, because people don't have that, and it's a difficult thing. And it can be really defeating. It can make you feel like, man, like, I just, will I ever have that? And so it's so good to see God's goodness, though, because leading up to that point, before that happened, it's so good to see that you still got to have some of like that interaction with her, and discover, like you said earlier, like how alike you guys were, and you were able to like really get to have that you were yearning for so long. And I'm just so grateful for what God did in that area of your life, and just how strong you are now. I mean, like, you are a mother of two incredibly incredible, like, kids, and they're little too, and that's the beautiful thing. It's that every season of a child's life is so different, but I feel like it gives you a new perspective because you're like, this is what it must be like for God. Because oh my goodness, you say no and they don't listen, and you're like,
Yeah.
this is what it must feel like for God. So now in your life, I have to ask, like, now that you're a mother and now that you are married and now that you have this life, like this new, I can only imagine that you're doing this new environment, for your kids, and you have this heart for them, and it's a whole new perspective.
Right. So I get the blessing of raising my kids and being there for them in a way that I wanted my parents to be there for me. So it's very healing for me to experience what to be what I wanted
Mhm.
as a child. I get to be that for my children. And
Um,
it's a beautiful healing process for me.
That's absolutely beautiful. I love how you said it's a healing process for you. Like you're able to be that for them, but also for yourself as well. Like you're living that and you're fulfilling it. And the best part is you're breaking old patterns. You're breaking old generational patterns and you're instilling new things and new life into your children and living water and all the things that Jesus promises. And so you are that turning point where you're following a lighted path, that Jesus is walking with you through, and you'll understand your children through every age of their life and every season because you've been at the bottom. You've understood grief, you've understood rejection, you've understood abuse. And so not that your kids would experience that in your home, but like if they ever experience, like, I kind of feel left out, how to meet them in that place, and then they are able to, when they get older, kind of pass that on, because like as you water them, they're going to touch other lives, and it's beautiful how God is going to do that through you and your family. And so, again, so grateful for how strong you are and what God has done in your life, and just this new light and this fire that you have for Him. So, of course, I'm going to ask, like, looking at the age that you are now and in the place that you are, looking back now, what would you say God has done with your pain?
I think that God has given me a very unique standpoint to help others.
Mm,
I've experienced so much pain and so much grief and so many different obstacles throughout my childhood that I've honestly been given a unique standpoint to help others. And that's really what I feel like God is working in my life now at this age, um, is giving me a calling to help others and to be a voice of reason in a world where there is so much pain and where there is so much hurt. Um, I think it's a blessing that I experienced what I experienced because now I can share the goodness of God in all of the pain with others. And that is my heart's desire more than anything.
wow. Wow. While you were talking, one of the things just popped into my head is a beacon, like a beacon in a storm, a lighthouse in rough waters. Like, I think that is what God has done. Like, He's grabbed you and put this light in you, and has purposely placed you not in a storm, but in a place of where when storms occur and happen, so many boats and lives will sail towards you because you are that beacon, you are that light, and you are so welcoming in that area of wanting to help, of that purpose that the Lord has given you. And so, what a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful way to just describe what God has done with your pain and how He's made you just this incredible person, and these gifts and this purpose, and just this beacon, that you, even with your family, like how you pour into all of that, and how you're able to like heal but also help others heal through it, and you don't shy away from anything. I can only imagine that, like, if someone were coming along and needing help, um you wouldn't hesitate. to give that hand, to be that person. And it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful to hear your testimony, hear your pain, your grief, and all of these things, and watch you just talk about how you know God has used that, and He's done what He's done with your pain. It's so absolutely beautiful. And so before we jump off, because again, I'm so grateful you took the time to sit here with me again today. If anyone wants to reach out to you and wants to say, hey, I'm going through something similar, or I'm trying to figure this out, if you want to share any way that they can reach out to you, absolutely do so, just in case anyone ever wants to.
Yes, most definitely. If anyone wants to ask me any questions or wants to share their story with me, I would be more than glad to listen and to have you reach out to me. So if that's you and you want to reach out to me, just send me an email, and my email is one@gmail.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving them that opportunity to reach out to you. And yeah, don't shy away. I really do encourage you, if you listen and you're like, wow, I really do want to reach out. I feel like there's no better person to reach out to, and with just such a kind heart. But yeah, with that being said, I feel like we have been successful in creating another interview and another recording. I am going to be so vigilant on this one to make sure we don't lose it, because I really value your testimony. Thank you so much for being on again.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure of mine to share.
Thank you so much for listening to What God Has Done With My Pain. If you are interested in helping me spread light and truth of what God can do with pain, go to givebutter.com/what God has done with my pain, so the podcast may continue to sustain future episodes. As always, a huge shout out to Lazuli for her song No Greater Love, which you can find on Spotify. And you can find Lazuli on Instagram at Lazuli PROJ. Swing by What Way This Way on Instagram to catch some behind the scenes snippets. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss a single interview. Meantime, I would love to hear from you on social media or email. Until next time.